Number 1. 18-year-old Safa Boular. In April 2017, 18-year-old Safa Boular, a British teenager from Vauxhall in London, was arrested for planning a terror attack in the UK. At that time, she became the youngest woman in the country to be convicted for an attack inspired by the group known as ISIS. Safa's story did not start overnight. According to investigators, her interest in violent extremism began when she was about 15, while she was still in school studying for her exams. At home and online, she was exposed to extremist ideas. Her 44-year-old mother, Mina Ditch, and her older sister, Rislane, were also said to have shown signs of radicalization. Through social media, Safa came into contact with a British man called Naweed Hussein, a 30-year-old ISIS fighter originally from Coventry who had traveled to Syria. The two began an intense online relationship. They sent each other messages and content that supported extremist views. In August 2016, even though they had never met in person, they held an unofficial online marriage ceremony. By this time, British security services were already watching her. Safa had spoken about wanting to travel to Syria and join Hussein there. She saw him not just as a partner, but as someone she wanted to follow into a war zone. Because of these concerns, her passport was taken away and she was prevented from leaving the country. When she realized she could no longer travel, her focus changed. Instead of trying to leave the UK, she began talking about carrying out an attack at home. Investigators later said she was encouraged in this by Hussein, who was still in Syria and under surveillance himself. While Hussein was being monitored, he unknowingly shared details of a plan involving grenades and firearms with undercover officers who were pretending to be fellow extremists. In mid-2017, he was killed in a targeted drone strike. Before his death, however, enough of his messages had already revealed how deep Safa was involved in extremist discussions. After learning of Hussein's death, Safa did not step back. Instead, she reportedly promised to continue what she believed was his mission. Still unaware that she was under close watch, she began speaking with another undercover officer she believed was Hussein's superior. She told this person about a plan to attack the British Museum in central London, a busy and well-known tourist location. Safa had already been arrested once for trying to travel in support of terrorism. While she was being held on remand for those earlier offenses, she kept planning. From inside prison, she used coded language to communicate with her older sister. She called the planned attack a Mad Hatter's Tea Party and referred to weapons as cakes. She encouraged her sister to carry out the attack in her place if she could not do it herself. On April 26, 2017, Safa's sister, 22-year-old Rislane, and their mother, Mina, were seen by police driving around central London. Officers later said they were carrying out reconnaissance or scoping out possible targets. The next day, the pair went to a supermarket in Wandsworth and bought a pack of kitchen knives. Counter-terrorism officers were watching them closely and moved in before any attack could happen. When police raided their homes, they seized phones, computers, and other devices. On these, they found a large amount of extremist material and planning documents. It became clear that all three women, Safa, her sister, and their mother, had played active roles in what was described as the UK's first all-female ISIS-linked plot. A fourth person, 21-year-old Kaula Barghouthi, was also convicted, not for planning the attack itself, but for failing to report what she knew to the authorities. In June 2018, at the Old Bailey, Safa's sister Rislane pleaded guilty to preparing terrorist acts. She was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years. Their mother, Mina, received a total sentence of 11 years and 9 months, with 6 years and 9 months to be served in custody and an extra 5 years on extended license in the community. Barghouthi was sentenced to 28 months in prison. Safa's own trial took place at the Old Bailey in early 2018. She faced two main charges of preparing acts of terrorism. First, for trying to travel to Syria to join ISIS. Second, for planning the British Museum attack after her travel plans were blocked. During the trial, Safa appeared in court in Western clothing rather than traditional Islamic dress. She claimed she had turned away from extremism and no longer believed in those ideas. Her defense argued that she had been groomed by Hussein, much older than her, and heavily influenced by her family environment. The judge, however, did not accept the idea that she was simply a naive victim. He described her as bright, articulate, and capable of making her own choices. In his view, she had acted with open eyes, fully aware of what she was doing. He also warned that she still posed a serious risk to the public because of her strong beliefs and willingness to act on them. Police and counter-terrorism officers later spoke publicly about the case. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Dean Hayden from UK Counter-Terrorism Policing said that all three women were filled with hate and a toxic ideology, and that if their plans had not been stopped, people could have been murdered or seriously injured. On August 3, 2018, Safa was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 13 years. That means she must serve at least 13 years before she can even be considered for release. As of 2025, Safa has spent several years behind bars. She was just 18 at the time of these offenses and will be in her early 30s when she becomes eligible to apply for release. Even then, it will be up to a parole board to decide if she is safe enough to return to the community. This case is a clear example of how quickly a vulnerable teenager can be drawn into violent extremism through online contacts, family influence, and manipulation. It also shows how serious the consequences are when someone chooses to follow that path. A young life that could have gone in many different directions is now locked into a life sentence, with her future controlled by the courts and prison system. For viewers, it raises difficult questions. How do we protect young people from extremist ideas online? And how do we spot the warning signs early enough to stop something like this before it reaches the point of a planned attack? Number 2. Ashlee Martinson. On March 7, 2015, in the quiet town of Peel, Wisconsin, 17-year-old Ashlee Martinson made a decision that changed her life and her family forever. That day, both of her parents, her 37-year-old stepfather, Thomas Tony Ayers, and her 40-year-old mother, Jennifer Ayers, were killed inside their rural home. Ashlee lived there with them and her three younger siblings, who were just 2, 8, and 9 years old. Outwardly, it looked like a normal family in a country house. But behind closed doors, Ashlee later said she was living in fear. On the morning of the crime, there was an argument. According to court documents, Tony took Ashlee's car keys and her phone as punishment. For a teenager already feeling trapped and angry, this pushed her over the edge. She later told the court that she felt she had no control over her own life, and that this argument was the breaking point. At some point after the confrontation, Ashlee picked up a shotgun from the house. She went to where her stepfather was and fired. He was hit once in the neck and once in the head. He died from his injuries. After that, Ashlee locked herself in the bathroom with the firearm. Her mother, Jennifer, realized something was wrong and forced her way into the bathroom. What happened next was fast and violent. Ashlee grabbed a knife and used it on her mother many times. The medical examiner later counted more than 30 wounds. Jennifer died at the scene. Even in the middle of this horror, Ashlee did not harm her younger siblings. Instead, she put food and a movie in a bedroom, locked the children in to keep them away from what had happened, and then left the house. She then contacted her 22-year-old boyfriend, Ryan Sisko. Together, they got into her mother's car and drove away from the scene, heading toward Indiana. For a brief time, it looked like they might be able to run, but police across state lines were already on alert. The next day, officers in Boone County, Indiana, stopped the car after it was flagged as stolen. Ashlee and Ryan were taken into custody without a struggle. When police back in Wisconsin went to the family home, they found the bodies of Jennifer and Tony, and the three children locked in the bedroom, physically unharmed but in a terrible situation. Under questioning, Ashlee admitted what she had done. She told detectives that she had planned and carried out the killings of both her mother and stepfather. She also talked about what she claimed had been going on in the house for years. Ashlee said that Tony had been physically abusive and very controlling. She described severe punishments, including being locked in her room for days. She also said her mother did not protect her and often ignored what was happening. At times, she said she felt like no adult in her life was truly on her side. Her defense team later presented a picture of a teenager growing up in what they called a toxic and violent environment. They brought in reports that suggested there had been abuse, neglect, and trauma. They argued that Ashlee acted out of desperation and fear, believing there was no other way to escape. Prosecutors, however, saw things differently. They agreed the home was dysfunctional, but said that the killings were not a sudden reaction in a moment of panic. They showed evidence that Ashlee had thought about violence before the crime. She had written dark fiction online that included violent fantasy scenes. She had also searched for information related to killing. To prosecutors, these were signs of planning, not just an emotional snap. They argued that despite her difficult life, Ashlee made a deliberate choice to end her parents' lives. Ashlee was originally charged with 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. In Wisconsin, that could mean life in prison. As the case moved forward, her lawyers and the prosecution reached a plea agreement. In July 2016, Ashlee pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree intentional homicide instead of first-degree. This meant the court would still see her actions as intentional and serious, but with more consideration of her age, background, and mental state. At the sentencing hearing, both sides presented their final arguments. The defense reminded the judge of the abuse reports, the strict and harsh home life, and Ashlee's claims that she felt trapped and hopeless. They said she saw no way out, and that she was still just a teenager when everything happened. The prosecution did not deny that Ashlee's life had been hard, but they highlighted the brutality of the crimes. 2 people were killed in very violent ways, and the younger children were left without both parents. They reminded the court that Ashlee had admitted to planning and had also tried to run away afterward, instead of calling for help. When it was Ashlee's turn to speak, she told the court that she was sorry and that she wished things had been different. She said she did not want her younger siblings to grow up thinking she did not care about them. The judge had to balance all of this: her age, her claims of abuse, the evidence of planning, and the extremely violent nature of the killings. In the end, the court decided that a long sentence was necessary. Ashlee was sentenced to 23 years in prison, followed by 17 years of extended supervision. Extended supervision is similar to parole. After she leaves prison, she will still be watched closely and must follow strict rules for many years. The judge said that while he recognized the difficult environment Ashlee had grown up in, the level of violence used against her parents and the planning involved meant that a strong punishment was required. 2 lives had been taken, and 3 children were left without their parents. As of 2025, Ashlee has spent around a decade behind bars. She is serving her sentence at the Tay-Cheetah Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, a facility that houses women. She was only 17 when the crime happened. If she serves the full 23 years, she will be around 40 years old when she is released from prison. The case of Ashlee Martinson is one that divides opinion. Some people see her as a victim of long-term abuse who finally snapped. Others see her as someone who planned and carried out the killings of 2 people who raised her, no matter how flawed they were. For viewers, this story raises important questions about what happens when warning signs at home are ignored, and how many young people are quietly living in fear without anyone stepping in to help. It also shows how a single day, mixed with years of pain, anger, and poor choices, can destroy an entire family and shape the rest of someone's life. Number 3. Christina Atkins. On August 1, 2006, in the quiet community of Roland Township, Michigan, a tragedy took place that shocked everyone who later heard about the case. A 13-year-old girl named Christina Atkins committed an act that ended the life of the woman who had raised her since birth, her grandmother, 53-year-old Virginia Bentley. Christina had lived with her grandmother for her entire life. To those outside the home, Bentley was seen as a steady guardian, someone who stepped in when Christina's parents could not. No one could have imagined that the girl she raised would someday take her life. On the day of the incident, Christina made a deadly decision. Her grandfather had been prescribed morphine pills for medical reasons. Christina took several of those pills and secretly put them into her grandmother's medication capsules. When Bentley later took her medicine, she unknowingly swallowed a dangerous amount of morphine. She died at home that same day. At first, the death did not raise any suspicion. Bentley was only 53, but had some health issues, and authorities believed she had passed away from natural causes or complications from her condition. The family grieved, and Christina returned to life as usual. But inside, she was hiding a terrible secret. 2 years later, in 2008, when Christina was 15, everything changed. For reasons that remain unclear, she confessed to what she had done. During questioning, she fully admitted that she had taken morphine from her grandfather's supply and switched it with her grandmother's medication. She said plainly that her intent was to kill her. There had been no fight, no sudden argument, just a deadly choice made quietly by a 13-year-old. This confession shocked investigators. They reopened the case, reviewed the evidence, and charged Christina with second-degree murder and possession of morphine. Christina's motive was never fully explained in public court documents. Prosecutors revealed no history of abuse or mistreatment between Christina and her grandmother. In fact, the grandmother had been her caregiver since birth. Some observers believed Christina may have struggled with hidden emotional problems, but no official explanation was given to the public. What was clear is that Christina knew exactly what she was doing when she tampered with the medication. She admitted under oath that her intention was to kill. In October 2008, Christina pleaded guilty in court. Before sentencing, the judge considered her age, her lack of criminal history, and the extremely unusual nature of the case. He also noted the cold and deliberate way the crime was carried out, poisoning someone who trusted her completely. On April 27, 2009, the judge sentenced Christina Atkins to 30 to 45 years in prison. This meant she would have to serve at least 30 years before she could even be considered for release. The judge said the crime was especially serious because Christina killed the person who had cared for her since she was an infant, someone who had given her a home and stability. He described the act as a grave betrayal and emphasized that even though Christina was young at the time of the crime, the consequences had to reflect the severity of what she had done. After sentencing, Christina was transferred to the Huron Valley Women's Prison in Michigan, the only women's prison in the state. As of 2025, Christina has served around 16 years of her sentence. She was only 13 when the incident happened, and 18 years have passed since her confession. Her earliest possible release date is December 2037, when she will be 45 years old. Christina has kept a low profile in prison. There have been no major public statements, no interviews, and very little information about her life behind bars. She remains one of the youngest girls in Michigan's history to be convicted of murder. Her case raises many questions that remain unanswered. Why did she do it? Was there something happening behind closed doors that no one saw? Did she have emotional or psychological struggles that were overlooked? Or was this a rare but chilling example of a violent act committed without clear warning signs? For viewers, Christina's case is one of the most unsettling because it involves a child, not someone acting out of fear, panic, or self-defense, but someone who calmly poisoned the only parent figure she had. It's a reminder of how complicated and unpredictable human behavior can be, even in young teenagers. Sometimes, even the people who seem closest and safest can be hiding dark intentions no one expects. As the years pass, Christina will remain in prison, serving out a long sentence for a crime that stunned her community and left her family permanently changed. Number 4. Paris Mayo. On the evening of March 23, 2019, in the quiet town of Ross-on-Wye in Herefordshire, 15-year-old Paris Mayo committed an act that shocked the entire country. That night, she gave birth alone in the living room of her family home, while her parents and brother were upstairs. What happened in that room led to the tragic death of her newborn son, later named Stanley. Paris had hidden her pregnancy from everyone around her. She later said she didn't fully realize she was pregnant until shortly before going into labor. At school, she studied childcare and spent time around children, but still, she kept her condition a secret. According to her own words, home life was difficult. She said her father, Patrick, made her feel unworthy and spoke to her harshly. Because of this, she tried to seek acceptance and affection from boys at a young age, which eventually led to the pregnancy. On the night Stanley was born, Paris went into labor unexpectedly. Instead of calling for help, she stayed silent, afraid her parents would hear her. Her mother was upstairs caring for her father, who was seriously ill and on dialysis at the time. Paris delivered the baby alone, without medical help, in the living room. Moments after giving birth, something went terribly wrong. The newborn suffered severe injuries. The judge later said the trauma Stanley suffered was similar to what victims experience in high-speed car crashes. The exact details of those injuries remain unclear, but the court believed some crushing force was used. Despite these injuries, Stanley was still alive for at least an hour. When Paris noticed he was showing signs of life, she placed cotton wool into his mouth, blocking his breathing completely. After that, she put his body inside a plastic bag or similar item and left it on the doorstep of the home. The next morning, her mother discovered the baby's body outside the house. She made a panicked and emotional call to emergency services, which was later played in court. Sadly, nothing could be done to save the child. Paris did not admit to wrongdoing at first. She told investigators that she didn't realize she was pregnant until the birth and claimed the baby had hit his head when he fell out. She said she didn't call for help because she feared what her parents would think. The investigation continued, and experts were brought in to assess Paris's mental state. The case was complex, especially because she was so young. Evidence about her family life, emotional struggles, and maturity level was presented, but it wasn't enough to remove responsibility for her actions. Her trial took place at Worcester Crown Court and lasted 5 weeks. The jury was given 2 choices: find her guilty of murder or find her guilty of a lesser charge known as child manslaughter, which suggests the mother was mentally disturbed during childbirth. The jury chose murder. During sentencing, Judge Garnham said the case was sad and troubling. He recognized that Paris was frightened, inexperienced, and immature. However, he also said she made the clear decision to end Stanley's life, and that she knew she was about to give birth at least an hour before she did. He also pointed out the extreme vulnerability of the victim, a newborn child, and the trust that was broken when a mother harms her own baby. While he accepted that the murder was not planned in advance, it was still intentional in the moment. In June 2023, Paris, then 19 years old, was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 12 years. Because of her age, she was sent to a young offenders institution. She must serve the entire 12 years before she can even be considered for release. By 2025, Paris has served nearly 2 years of her sentence. She was only 15 when the crime took place. If she serves the full minimum, she won't be eligible for parole until she is around 27 years old. The case of Paris Mayo raises painful questions. How desperate must a teenager feel to give birth alone in silence? Why did she feel she couldn't ask anyone for help? And how did fear and secrecy turn into tragedy? This case reminds us that hidden struggles inside a family can sometimes lead to heartbreaking outcomes, especially when a young girl is overwhelmed, isolated, and afraid. But it also shows that even at a young age, the courts still hold a person responsible when a life is intentionally taken, especially the life of a defenseless newborn. Number 5. Jamie Silvonik. On March 15, 2015, in Upper Macungie Township, Pennsylvania, 14-year-old Jamie Silvonik became involved in a shocking and heartbreaking crime, the murder of her own mother, 54-year-old Cheryl Silvonik. Jamie was only a teenager at the time, but the investigation later revealed that she played a major role in planning what happened that night. Jamie grew up in a quiet suburban home. She lived with her mother, Cheryl, and had what appeared to be a normal family life to the outside world. But behind the scenes, Jaime was in a relationship with a 20-year-old man named Caleb Barnes, a U.S. Army soldier stationed in Maryland. The age difference between them caused concern for her mother, who worried that Barnes was manipulating her. Tension grew over time as Cheryl tried to intervene and protect her daughter. On the night of the crime, things took a deadly turn. Cheryl spent the evening driving Jaime and Caleb to a concert in Scranton, Pennsylvania. After the event, she drove them back home, arriving in the early hours of March 15th. Surveillance cameras later showed the family's SUV pulling into their driveway. Cheryl parked the vehicle, unaware that she was in danger. According to courtroom testimony, as soon as the SUV came to a stop, Caleb, who was sitting in the back seat, attacked Cheryl. He used a knife and stabbed her multiple times inside the vehicle. Jamie, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, did nothing to stop him. Instead, the evidence later showed that she had encouraged him before the attack. After the stabbing, the two moved Cheryl's body into the back of the SUV. Then, Jamie and Caleb drove to a wooded area in rural Pennsylvania, where they dragged Cheryl's body into a ditch and covered it with dirt and snow in an attempt to hide the crime. By the next morning, Cheryl was reported missing. When police began investigating, they soon found her body. Very quickly, Jaime and Caleb became the main suspects. Investigators uncovered text messages between Jaime and Caleb that told the real story. These texts revealed that the murder was pre-planned. The messages included phrases like, "She needs to go," and "I want her gone." These messages made it clear that Jaime wanted her mother out of the way and that Caleb was willing to help her with the plan. This digital evidence became one of the strongest pieces of the prosecution's case. Both Jaime and Caleb were arrested shortly after Cheryl's body was found. Caleb was charged with homicide, abuse of a corpse, and other related crimes. Jaime, despite being just 14, was charged as an adult due to the seriousness of the crime. Jaime's lawyers tried to argue that the case should be moved to juvenile court because of her age and emotional condition. However, the judge ruled that she should be tried as an adult since the crime involved planning and intentional violence. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Jaime eventually accepted a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for the chance to testify against Caleb. During Caleb's trial in 2017, Jaime testified in detail about what happened. She described the attack and admitted that she had repeatedly encouraged Caleb to kill her mother. She also told the court that she was ineffably in love with him and felt deeply attached to him. Her testimony was emotional, but it did not lessen the seriousness of her role. Caleb tried to shift the blame onto Jaime. He claimed that she was the actual killer and that he only helped move the body afterward, but the jury did not believe his version of events. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After Caleb was convicted, Jaime faced her own sentencing. The judge reviewed her age, her mental health evaluations, and her involvement. Her defense argued that she had been manipulated by an older man who knew how to control her. They said she was emotionally vulnerable and not mature enough to understand the full outcome of her actions. But prosecutors pointed to her text messages, her planning, and her encouragement of the murder. They said Jaime was not just a passive victim. She was an active and willing participant in the plan to kill her mother. In the end, the judge sentenced Jaime Silvestri to 35 years to life in prison. This means she must serve at least 35 years before she can even be considered for parole. During the sentencing, Jaime cried as the court talked about her mother's final moments. She admitted that while she did not physically stab her mother, she knew her involvement made her equally responsible. Jaime was sent to SCI Muncie, a women's state prison in Pennsylvania. There, she began serving her long sentence. In 2019, when she was 18 years old, Jaime requested a new trial. Her new legal team argued that her earlier lawyer did not properly present evidence about her mental health and childhood trauma. They said this made Jaime look more manipulative and mature than she really was. However, her previous attorney defended his work, and the court did not overturn her conviction. As of 2025, Jaime has served about 10 years of her sentence. She will not be eligible for parole until around 2050, when she will be about 49 years old. The case of Jaime Silvestri is one of the most disturbing examples of how teenage emotions, an unhealthy relationship, and poor judgment can lead to devastating consequences. Jaime was only 14, deeply attached to an older boyfriend, and caught in a situation she didn't fully understand. But the law made it clear. Being young does not remove responsibility for planning and encouraging a violent crime. This case shows how a once peaceful home can become the setting for a tragedy when manipulation, obsession, and teenage anger mix together. Jamie Silvonik lost her life, and her daughter Jaime lost her future, all because of a deadly plan that should never have happened. Number 6. Trinity Shockley. On February 14, 2025, a shocking school attack plan was stopped just in time in Mooresville, Indiana. The person behind the plot was an 18-year-old high school senior named Trinity Shockley. Although no one was harmed, investigators later discovered that her plans were detailed, serious, and could have led to a major tragedy if they had not been stopped early. This case stands out because almost every warning sign came through digital messages, and one anonymous tip saved many lives. Trinity was a student at Mooresville High School. According to investigators, she had been planning a school shooting for more than a year. She talked about her admiration for Nicholas Cruz, the gunman responsible for the 2018 Parkland school shooting. She even had pictures and writings in her room praising him. Her plan was scheduled for February 14th, the exact anniversary of the Parkland attack. Everything came to light on February 10th, 2025, when someone used the Sandy Hook Promise "Say Something" tip line. The tipster reported that a friend, later confirmed to be Trinity, had access to an AR-15 rifle, had recently bought a bulletproof vest, and was talking about Parkland Part 2. Trinity had also made direct threats toward a fellow student, saying she planned to shoot him. The FBI traced the threatening Discord messages back to Trinity's home address. From there, the case moved quickly. The Morgan County Sheriff's Office and the Mooresville Metropolitan Police Department joined the investigation. On February 12th, police executed a search warrant at Trinity's home. Inside her bedroom, they found disturbing items, including notebooks filled with writings about mass shootings, repeated statements like "die, die, die" pages decorated with swastikas, 3 pin buttons showing mass shooters like Cruz and Dylan Roof, a large collage of mass killers taped to her bedroom wall, several AR-15 magazines, and a box of ammunition, a bulletproof vest, in her father's room. Officers did not recover an actual firearm during the search, but the amount of planning and preparation still showed clear intent. Around the same time, school staff reported that Trinity had a breakdown on campus. She opened up to a counselor, saying she was in love with Nicholas Cruz and even imagined having children with him. She cried while explaining that her mother had recently passed away, and she blamed herself for her mother's death because she was involved in an earlier car accident caused by a drunk driver who later died. She told the counselor she felt hopeless and mentally unstable. The counselor immediately contacted the administration and law enforcement. Trinity was arrested later that day without any struggle. She was taken to the Morgan County Jail and held without bond. When she appeared in court, she reportedly asked the judge how long she would stay in jail if nobody paid her bond, showing confusion and lack of understanding about the seriousness of the charges. She was officially charged with conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit intimidation, and 2 terrorism-related charges. Even though she never carried out the attack, the law allowed prosecutors to charge her based on intent and overt planning. Police credited the anonymous tipster and fast action by the school's threats team with preventing a tragedy. They stated clearly that without the tip, Trinity's plan would likely have resulted in injuries or deaths. During the investigation, a fuller picture of Trinity's struggles began to surface. Before her arrest, Trinity had gone through several emotional crises. Her mother had recently died, and she was overwhelmed with grief. She had been injured in a car crash caused by a drunk driver. After learning the driver died from his injuries, she blamed herself. She was struggling in school and feared her future was falling apart. Court records suggested that this emotional breakdown, combined with her obsession with mass shooters, created a dangerous mindset that escalated over time. As of May 2025, Trinity Shockley has been in jail for around 3 months, waiting for her trial. She remains held without bond due to the seriousness of the charges. If convicted on all counts, she could spend decades in prison, possibly remaining incarcerated into her late 40s or even older. The final outcome will depend on the trial and whether she accepts a plea deal. Although this case did not end in violence, it shows how important it is for students, teachers, and parents to speak up when they see warning signs. Trinity's case is a reminder that mental health struggles, grief, and online radicalization can create extremely dangerous situations if left unaddressed. Thanks to one anonymous message, a major tragedy was prevented, and many lives were saved. Number 7. Megan Dakota, Grunwald. On January 30th, 2014, a deadly chain of events shook Utah, and a 17-year-old girl named Megan Dakota Grunwald became the center of one of the state's most controversial criminal cases. Megan did not pull the trigger, but she was behind the wheel while her older boyfriend, 27-year-old Jose Angel Garcia, carried out a violent crime spree that left one police officer dead and several others injured. That morning, a Utah County Sheriff's deputy named Corey Ride noticed a pickup truck parked on the side of the road. Inside the truck were Megan, who was driving, and Garcia, who was in the passenger seat. When Deputy Ride approached them, he had no idea of the danger ahead. Megan answered his questions quietly, and everything seemed normal. But moments after he returned to his patrol vehicle, Garcia slid into the backseat of the truck, rolled down the rear window, and shot Deputy Ride in the head, killing him instantly. Instead of running or calling for help, Megan drove away on Garcia's command. This became one of the core arguments in her case. Prosecutors said she willingly helped him escape, while her defense said she was terrified and acted under pressure. But the fact remains, she drove. After the first killing, police began to chase the truck. During the pursuit, Garcia fired repeatedly at officers, hitting several patrol cars. Witnesses later said Megan never stopped the truck on her own and made no effort to pull over or flee from Garcia. Every time he told her to speed up, she did. The chase became more violent when the truck got stuck in traffic. Garcia ordered Megan to drive onto the shoulder to get away, and she obeyed again. A short time later, they encountered another officer, Deputy Greg Sherwood. Garcia shot him too, hitting him in the head, but Sherwood survived. Megan kept driving. Eventually, the pair abandoned the truck and tried to escape in another stolen vehicle. Garcia carjacked a woman by pointing a gun at her head while Megan waited nearby. They fled again, with police right behind them. The crime spree finally ended when officers rammed the stolen vehicle. Garcia jumped out and engaged in a shootout, but was struck multiple times. He later died from his injuries. Megan was arrested at the scene. She cried and told officers that Garcia forced her to drive and threatened her, but investigators found several pieces of evidence that made her story hard to believe. They learned that Garcia and Megan had been in a long-term relationship. Nobody approved of Megan had opportunities to run or signal for help, but never did. She stayed with Garcia after the first shooting, the second shooting, and even after the carjacking. Her behavior during the chase suggested she was following his instructions, not resisting them. She was charged as an adult, facing multiple counts of aggravated murder, attempted murder, and aiding a criminal. During the trial, prosecutors argued that Megan was not a helpless child, but a willing partner who chose to help Garcia escape, even as he committed violent crimes in front of her. They did not need to prove she pulled the trigger, only that she intentionally assisted him. Her defense said Megan was controlled, manipulated, and afraid of Garcia. They argued that she was a teenager overwhelmed by a dangerous adult and that she acted under duress. But the jury was not convinced. They believed she had many chances to stop or escape, but chose not to. In 2015, Megan was convicted on 11 charges, including felony murder, a law that says if you help someone commit a violent crime and a person dies, you can be held equally responsible. She was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Years later, she appealed the conviction. Utah's Supreme Court ruled that part of her trial had errors and overturned one of her charges, but they upheld the most serious ones. In 2022, after a new hearing, she was sentenced again to a term very close to her original punishment. Megan will spend most of her adult life behind bars and will not be eligible for parole until she is well into her late 40s. As of 2025, Megan remains in prison at the Utah State Women's Facility. She still maintains that she acted out of fear, not choice. But the families of the victims, especially the family of Deputy Corey Ride, feel that her decisions that day helped a dangerous man take innocent lives. The case of Megan Dakota Grunwald leaves behind a haunting reminder. Even if someone doesn't fire the gun, supporting or helping a violent offender, even out of fear, love, or confusion, can destroy lives, including your own. Number 8. Morgan Geyser. On May 31, 2014, one of the most disturbing crimes involving children took place in Waukesha, Wisconsin. 3 12-year-old girls, Morgan Geyser, Anissa Wire, and their friend Peyton Bella Leutner, went into the woods together after a sleepover. Only 2 of them walked out unharmed. What happened that morning became known worldwide as the Slender Man stabbing, a case that shocked parents, teachers, police, and mental health experts. Morgan Geyser was a quiet girl with long hair and glasses, but she was also struggling with mental illness that most people around her didn't fully understand at the time. She had hallucinations, saw imaginary people, and believed online stories were real. She kept many of these thoughts to herself, so her parents didn't know how serious her symptoms were. Her closest friend, Anissa, spent a lot of time with her reading scary stories online, especially stories about a fictional character called Slender Man. To most kids, Slender Man was just internet horror, but to Morgan and Anissa, he became real. They convinced themselves that he could hurt their families if they didn't obey him. Over time, Morgan began to believe that killing someone would prove their loyalty to Slender Man and allow them to live with him in a mansion in the forest. Their chosen target was Peyton, who trusted them completely. The 3 girls had a sleepover the night before the attack. They celebrated Morgan's 12th birthday, played games, and acted like normal friends. But secretly, Morgan and Anissa were planning to kill Peyton the next morning. They had talked about ways to do it, stabbing her in her sleep, attacking her in a bathroom, or taking her somewhere isolated. But in the end, they waited until the next day. On the morning of the attack, the girls walked to a nearby park and then moved deeper into a wooded area where no one could see them. There, Anissa pushed Peyton to the ground, and Morgan took out a kitchen knife she had hidden in her waistband. Peyton screamed when the stabbing began. Morgan stabbed her 19 times, wounds to her arms, legs, torso, and one wound that missed her heart by less than a millimeter. Another wound cut through her diaphragm. When Peyton begged for help, the girls told her to lie still or you'll lose blood faster. They walked away, believing she would die and that Slender Man would be pleased. But Peyton refused to give up. Bleeding and barely conscious, she crawled out of the woods to a bike path where a man riding by saw her and immediately called 911. She was rushed to the hospital and survived after emergency surgery. Meanwhile, Morgan and Anissa were found hours later walking along a highway. They told police they were heading to Slender Man's mansion in a forest hundreds of miles away. Their statements shocked detectives. Morgan spoke calmly and without emotion as she explained that she had to stab Peyton or Slender Man would hurt her family. This interview made it clear that Morgan's mental state was far from normal. During the investigation, psychiatrists examined Morgan and diagnosed her with early-onset schizophrenia, a very serious mental disorder. Experts later said she started showing symptoms at age 3, but no one realized how bad it was. She saw hallucinations, talked to imaginary people, and believed fictional characters were alive. She wasn't pretending. Her delusions felt real to her. Because of how violent the attack was, both Morgan and Anissa were charged as adults, even though they were just children. The case gained national attention, not only because of the ages involved, but also because it raised questions about mental illness in children and the influence of online horror stories. In 2017, Morgan Geyser pleaded guilty to attempted first-degree intentional homicide. Because of her severe mental illness, she was not sent to prison. Instead, she was ordered to spend up to 40 years in a secure psychiatric institution. Doctors believed she needed long-term treatment and that releasing her too early could be dangerous. Morgan was only 15 when she was sentenced. As the years passed, Morgan remained in the Winnebago Mental Health Institute, receiving medication and therapy. In early 2025, a judge approved her request for conditional release, meaning she could potentially leave the mental hospital under strict supervision. However, there were concerns about the location she planned to move to, especially because it was close to Peyton's home. Because of these safety concerns, her release was delayed until authorities could create a safe and appropriate plan. As of 2025, Morgan is still in a secure psychiatric facility, awaiting a final decision about her release. She is now around 22 years old. She has spent most of her teenage years and early adulthood hospitalized. Doctors say she has improved with medication and structured treatment, but she is still considered a person who must be monitored very carefully. Peyton Leutner, the victim, survived her injuries and has lived a private life. She has spoken publicly only a few times, explaining that she forgives Morgan but will never forget what happened. She said healing took years, but she refuses to let the attack define her future. The case of Morgan Geyser remains one of the most troubling examples of juvenile violence in the United States. It shows how dangerous untreated mental illness can be, how easily young minds can get lost in online fantasy, and how friendship can be twisted when fear and delusion take over. Above all, it is a story about a child who believed a monster was real, a friend who barely survived, and a community forever changed by a crime no one imagined children could commit.